So last couple times we talked about if they're framing, how we get past the frames to attack them. Today what we're going to do is we're going to transition to a scarf position. And what that means, when I say frames, it means he's using the frame of his body to keep my weight off of him. Basically his forearm is in front, and he's using his arms and his elbows to stop me from kind of crushing down on him very much here. It helps him make space so that he can try to escape. See, this arm is walking here across my hips, so it's hard to go above his head, and it's all hard to drive in. This one's across my neck, which makes it hard for me to lean on him. One way to deal with frames here is to switch to a scarf. And what that means is, I'm on my knees right now. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to cup this far side shoulder just like we did on that arm bar. Okay. Next step is the knee that's blocking his hip. Okay, so when you have side control, you always need to block their hip on the near side. And right now I'd be doing it with my knee. If that knee wasn't here, he could just bring his knee across my belly and he could put me back in the guard. Okay, so I have to find a way to block that hip. I need to move that leg though. So what I'm going to do is I'm cupping the shoulder here. I'm going to sprawl my left leg here. But as I do that, I'm going to block his hip with my hip. So I go here. So now I'm blocking his knee from coming across by going kind of hip to hip. Okay, so I have the far side shoulder. I'm going hip to hip. This hand is going to come under, and I'm just going to cup underneath his elbow and apply upward pressure. Now, I'm going to get up on my toes, and I'm going to walk my hips up into his armpit. And now I don't have to lean forward quite as much. I still want my head forward. I don't want to lean back like this. If I lean back, he can push my face and he can sit up. Or he can bring his leg over my head, right leg over my head and push me away. And then sit up, right? So you got to keep your head somewhat forward, but you don't have to lean into that one quite as much. Okay? And this is called a scarf position. Notice what I did is, rather than being the knee that was blocking the hip is now up by his head. The other one, I'm going to step back and I'm going to post it on the mat. Now, scarf is also a really good position for putting pressure on your partner here. So if you want to add pressure, right now my butt is sitting on the ground. But what I want to get really good pressure is I pull up on, pulling his arm into my armpit on this side. I can lift his shoulder slightly on that side, and then the last thing I do is I just barely pick my butt up off the ground. And now I should be pretty heavy. Okay. So he's framed up. I have his neck, and I have his far side armpit. I'm going to cup the shoulder. I'm going to sprawl and go hip to hip. Here. Cup his elbow on this side, and I'm going to walk my hips into his armpit. This leg comes up, this one steps back, knee up. Don't sit here with your knees together. This allows me that if he tries to shrimp out, I can push back. This is also the one that allows me to put pressure on him. Okay? All right, so now we're in scarf, and there's a whole series of attacks here from scarf. Now, number one, like we did the other day, I have the key lock. And so we're just going to review that one first. So I'm in scarf. This one's already in front of me. Now that I don't have to put pressure here, I can sit back enough to put my hand on his wrist. And now I'm going to drive with this foot back to his ear and my head to his wrist. Pinning this wrist to the mat. This hand goes to my own wrist. Now look at this elbow. I want to wedge it in by his neck and his shoulder. Notice his hips are coming up. There's already pressure. Loosen it a little bit. So this elbow is coming all the way in here. This elbow, you want to pull as close as you can too. You'll feel the shoulder tighten up. Last thing that's going to make this tight is to roll both of your wrists up. Now all I do is I keep my weight, I keep his wrist pinned to the mat, and I slide it backwards and lift his elbow. So I'm lifting his elbow this way at the same time as I'm sliding his hand backwards. And this was the same one we did the other day. It's a good review though, because what you're trying to do is you're trying to clear this hand. once you're in scarf, it's vulnerable to attack the key lock. A lot of times what they'll do is they'll hide it on the other side of your head, which is kind of what you want for the rest of the attacks today. Here, we're working to get past those frames. So I'm going to go to the scarf first. So cup the shoulder, sprawl and block his hip, walk into his armpit here, pulling up on his elbow. Now I'm in scarf. If this one's here, this hand can go from his elbow to his wrist. Now this knee comes back up. See how I'm trapping under his tricep as I come back up. I don't want to come back here where he can start pushing again. So once I'm here, I've cleared into his armpit. This one comes here, and this knee comes up, and I'm trapping that near side arm too. Here and here. See my elbows coming right into that crook of his neck and his shoulder. I drive my weight to keep his wrist on the mat, and I elevate his elbow and pull back on his wrist. This particular technique is pretty easy. Most people fight out of it before you get it, okay? In the situations where it works, you usually find that the guy that makes it work is a lot bigger or a lot stronger than the other person. Now, part of the reason for attacking it, though, is not necessarily to, I mean, it's always if you can tap them, but sometimes it's just a matter of attacking it, he's going to fight out, but when he fights out, he's going to put his arm in a position that's better for the next technique in the line, right? You're making him react, okay? We're going to start with the same series here. So I'm going to that same position, hip to hip. Notice I'm not going hip to hip like this. I'm not on top of him. I'm low. Here, and I'm walking hips up. Okay. When I go for this, a lot of times he's just going to fight out. Now his arm's on this side of my body, or on this side of my head. And that's what I was looking for. Now look at this, sets up the arm bar we did during warm-up. That's what we did the other day. We set up this exact thing. I came back to my knees and I did the arm bar. Okay. Today we're going to set up, this was setting up a couple of other things. So from here, I had this elbow, I have this one, I'm going to scoop this one up. Now look at, again, I'm just taking the palm of my hand and I'm putting it on the elbow. I'm not hooking. A lot of you guys are hooking like this. I find it's easier for them to pull their elbow out. Okay? But if I'm here and I'm blocking his elbow with the palm of my hand and I pinch his wrist with my elbow, if he tries to pull his elbow out, he can't because I keep pushing back against his elbow here. Whereas when I hug it, he pulls his elbow right out. He's able to find an angle to pull his elbow out. So this may not feel as tight to you, but this is a much better control position. So I'm here. Now, I'm really high in his armpit right now. I have found for this next technique that I need to move my hips back. You might have to adjust where your hips are on their body. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to move my hips back a little bit. Okay? My head stays forward, and now what I do is I keep this in my armpit, and I grab my toes. I think we did this one the other day too. Okay? So I'm keeping his arm stuck in my armpit. See how I'm keeping my elbow close so that there's really no room for him to pull out? If he tried to pull out, his elbow's being blocked with my leg right now. Okay? So now I bring this over his head and hook it right by his in the same spot my elbow went on that last technique. And my hips are coming up off the ground just slightly. Now this elbow is going to hook over his wrist, and I'm going to pull my elbow back at the same time as I drive my hips forward for the arm lock. So I was in that start position we went to. I cleared this one. Okay. So from here, if you can do it from way up here, that's fine. If you're flexible enough to get this next to his neck, but I find that scooting my hips back closer to his hips helps me get this over his head. And I grab it here, and sometimes I can't get it here, but if I push a little bit, I can drive across a little bit. Now, this elbow goes to his wrist, and I'm pushing my hips forward and pulling my elbow back. Start from the beginning, we're setting this up exactly like the last technique. Shoulder, hip to hip, pulling up on his arm. Yeah, he might put it out of the way right there because he feels it's vulnerable, right? So now that I'm here, I'm pulling up on his elbow. I will scoop my hips back to his hips. Okay? But notice this is tight. Even if he gets past my elbow, you see his arm still there, I can scoop it up again. I'm not giving him space. I don't want his elbow to hit the ground. that's when I lose it, okay? So I'm here, I kind of keep my elbow close to my body, I grab my toes, I can't reach from here, but what I do is I use this foot on the mat to push my weight over, and then I can bring my foot to the ground right by his neck and shoulder. Now my elbow comes backwards and my hips come forward. This way. Boom. Okay. I'm going to clear the frames the same way, so going to scarf, boom, walking up this way, I'm attacking this, so he brings that over the other side of my head. Okay, so now, same thing, I'm going to grab my toes, I'm going to drive across. Sometimes this arm comes out. That doesn't matter now, because I have this arm here. Notice how far I drove across? See how this one's up on my shoulder? All I'm going to do is I'm going to take this free hand that was the one that was here, and I'm going to grab over his elbow. Now I'm going to turn his elbow like I'm trying to twist it up towards the ceiling. So I'm twisting this way. Now I'm going to arch my back until my shoulder hits right underneath his thumb. Both hands on top. Hell yeah. And I'm pulling his elbow into my body. Way up. Here, if that's cleared, that's great. I'm stepping over here. Sometimes as I step over, I lose that one. As long as this one's here. So see how it's kind of on my bicep? I'm going to pull it up on top of my shoulder. This hand, I don't want to grab at the elbow. I want to kind of hook all the way around as far as I can go. So my fingers are going to hook around because I'm going to use that to twist. I want to twist the point of his elbow is facing that way right now. I'm going to twist it as close to the ceiling, basically as far as it'll go. Okay. Once I have that, I'm going to arch my back so that my shoulder ends up right under the thumb. So I'm here, right at the thumb. Two hands on the elbow, and you just pull it into your belly. There's space between you and him. Now, if your chest is against it, it's not going to work as well. You got to kind of sit back a little bit, your hips back. You arch your back to slide into the right position. You don't push your chest forward. I know a lot of people have issues with this kind of, they call it a reverse armbar a lot of times. The trick is to twist the elbow. You're basically turning it out. You don't want the wrist on your chest. You want it on the top of your shoulder. That's how you make space to actually pull on the elbow. Okay. I find a lot of people as they extend, they do this. Now I can pull on it. It might be a little pressure, but I'm stopping myself from actually having the space to break it if I want it. What we need is this. All that space now is the space I would use to break his arm. Okay? So there needs to be a space between your chest and the arm. And that's why you rest it on the top of your shoulder, not on the front of your chest. Up. I'm switching to the scarf, driving up, I'm attacking this one. When it goes to the other side, I'm going to go ahead and bring this over. This hand, right now, see what direction his elbow bends? Right there. This hand is going to hook it, and I'm going to pull like this. If his elbow bent now, it would bend more towards the ground, right? Because I'm pulling his elbow up towards the seat. You see?
Woo! That's a good one, too.
I'm bending it so you guys can actually see the direction of his arm. Okay. But see how I'm resting it on the top of my shoulder? I slide till I get to his wrist, and I pull in towards my body with both hands. Today what we're going to do is we are going to, again, dealing with his framing. So he's here. So a lot of what I've been doing from our side control is dealing with the fact that a lot of times they get their frames in and how we deal with that. And going to scarf is one of the biggest ways. One of the other ways besides moving to scarf is to transition to north-south. Okay, and that's what I'm going to do today. We're going to concentrate on that transition here. Okay, so right now, he's got his frame across my neck and he's got his frame across my hip. Okay, the frame across the hip is the one that really stops me from moving to north-south. Anytime I try to circle that way, he's just gonna bring his elbow up on my hip, right? So that's the one that I'm gonna end up having to deal with most on this particular transition. The far side one is easy to clear when you move to north-south, and I'll show you how in just a second. We're here, he's framed up. I'm gonna deal with the far side one first, so this arm comes out from under his head, and I'm gonna bring this one all the way across, and I'm gonna pinch my elbow close to his elbow and trapping his arm tight to his body. Now it's even hard, because the frame is with his elbow, right? The minute I trap his elbow, he can push with his hands, but now he's not framed with his elbow anymore. So that's, the frame's gone. Okay. Now, I have to block his hip. Right now I'm blocking it with my left knee. So I'm gonna use my hand because I have to move my knee to transition to north-south. So I'm gonna bring my hand across and I'm gonna block his hip on the near side with my left hand. Okay, now I have to deal with this frame on my hip. If I just started circling now, he'd block, okay? So here's what I do to clear this near side frame. What I do is I elevate my hips a little bit. And what I want to do is right now my hips are pushing against his elbow, which is the strongest part of the frame. What I want to do is raise just a little bit so that I can get my hips at his wrist, okay? And once I do that, I'm going to drive my hips straight down on his wrist. So I'm here.
Yeah, that's a bummer.
I'm coming here and I'm dropping right there, smashing it all the way to the ground. Now, once it's smashed to the ground, I don't lift my hips to circle. I keep my weight on it, and I just keep circling until I'm all the way past. And now I'm in my north-south position. I even have my ribs tight against his head. This would be no-gi, would be my setup for going to like the north-south choke and stuff. Okay, but now that I'm here, my left arm now is in his armpit. My right arm is over his bicep. We're going to transition back, but what I'm going to do at this point is this arm's in his armpit, this arm's going to scoop under, and I'm going to go 4 fingers in right behind his neck. Okay? So I'm catching here. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and pinch and try to catch under his elbow. Pull your elbow out, like your elbow. I don't want his elbow here. I want to be here. So as soon as I get this, I'm going to trap his elbow so he can't pull that elbow through my armpit. You see how that works? Okay, now I have a lot of control over his shoulder. This is really strong. Boom, so I was here north-south. I go 4 fingers in the collar behind his neck. I pinch his elbow and I circle back to kind of a side control here. Now notice as I circle back, his shoulder's now elevated off the mat. I'm still pinching his elbow to his ribs over here with my elbow. Okay? So, his near side shoulder's elevated. I'm pinching his elbow, so his right arm is kind of useless. I mean, he can extend and try to push with his hand, but there's really not many places he can put that arm. Okay? So now what I'm going to do is I'm already set up for my paper cutter. They call it the paper cutter, they call it the hatchet choke. Some people call it a cheese cutter. Okay. What I'm going to do from here, I want to keep his elbow pinned to his body, but I want to transition this hand to his collar. So what I'm going to do is my first transition is going to be elbow up onto his chest, and this hand's pinning his elbow to his body. So I'm already getting closer to his collar. And there's no way for him to pull my arm away right now. Now, what I'm going to do is this hand's going to slide, and as it slides, his thumb's going to hook in his collar, and I'm going to grab it. It's not super tight right now, but that's good enough. And that gave it, if I just went from here to reach for his collar, see, he'd be blocking.
So you keep it snip.
So I'm keeping it, I'm pinning his elbow, transition, pinning his elbow, transition, thumb in. Okay, now that I have this, I'm going, and again, remember his shoulder should be elevated on the near side. That makes it hard for him to hide his chin. If his shoulder was down, he could turn his chin facing me, and it would be almost impossible to get under his chin if he tucks his chin and faces me. Okay? But the minute I elevate his shoulder, there's almost nowhere for him to hide his chin. Even if he turns his chin all the way towards me, as far as his neck will go, I can still get under his chin right there. But I want to pull the collar, and then I get under his chin. Now, to finish the choke, I have this nice and tight. All I do is I drop this elbow to the mat, and I sprawl my right leg. Once my elbow's on the mat, if he's not tapping yet, I start opening it up like this, and I'm pulling his collar down as my elbow opens. The biggest defense here is when I'm here, the minute he gets here is to turn into me, right? But when I first get this lapel, or when I first get my forefingers in, if I pinch his elbow now and elevate his shoulder, he can't turn in anymore. Big part of it, you're trying to put him in a position where it's almost impossible for him to do the things he needs to do to defend. So we're here. I'm going to bring my arm across and pin his elbow to his ribs. The big mistake I see is people hug the shoulder here. All the way, almost elbow to elbow, and pinch tight with your elbow. I'm not even grabbing anything here. Block his hip with my left hand. Okay. I'm going to elevate and go on top of his wrist and smash it. So I come here and there. I'm smashing it all the way to the ground. Now notice as I'm doing this how it's sliding back. Walk it forward. Keep his elbow pinned. Now I keep my belly low as I circle, and a lot of times he's pulling his arm out because it was uncomfortable when I smashed his arm. Once his arm comes out, I'm going to go 4 fingers in his collar. I'm going to pinch his elbow up into my armpit, and I'm going to circle back around, and as I circle, see how his shoulder elevates. That elevation of the shoulder is stopping one of his biggest defenses against this choke. Okay? Now I need to find a way to get my second grip without him stopping the grip. So I transition from pinning his elbow with my elbow to pinning his elbow with my hand. From there, I'm sliding to his collar. Boom. I'm just kind of, as I'm sliding, that thumb is going to hook around. So I'm here, here, here. And I'm getting as close as I can. I don't have to be like right on his neck. Okay? I just want to get as close as I can, and as soon as I get a grip, I don't move this grip ever again. Because now his arm's free. If I let go of his collar for a second, he's going to clear. Okay? As long as I have this and my elbow's tight to my body, I should be able to finish this now. Even if it's not super tight here. Okay? I still have his elbow pinched up in my armpit on this side. I'm going to pull the collar towards his chin or under his chin and drop my elbow to the mat at the same time as I sprawl my right leg. So I'm here, I'm sprawling. My elbow's on the mat. That may not, because my arm's so long, it's not quite choking him yet, so I have to pull down more. I open my elbow and pull. I'm here. I'm setting it up by clearing the frame by going to north-south. Dropping my weight on it. Now, on the side that my arm is in his armpit. Okay, I'm going to scoop up this elbow again, just like last time, but I'm not putting my, I can, if I wanted to, put my forefingers in. In fact, let's go ahead and do that. But instead of circling back to the same side, I'm going to circle to the other side, and I'm going to pull his shoulder up off the mat. Okay, so I'm circling to this side. I'm going back because I want to keep his arm trapped here. So before, see how his arm was coming in front of my belly? Before his arm comes in front of my belly, I'm going to bring this hand under his neck, and I want to trap basically his elbow in my armpit, hugging under his neck here. Okay? Now, I'm going to pull out the collar here, and I'm going to hand it to this hand, and that locks it in. This free hand now, I have a completely free hand because I have his lapel and I have his elbow trapped in my armpit. his free hand goes in front of our bellies and comes out here and finds his arm, which he can't hide. And I have an option for either a wrist lock here, boom, or I grab his wrist here and I drop my weight on his elbow and pull his wrist into my belly. Yeah. It's basically a key lock this way.
Wow.
Yeah, blocking his elbow there. So again, coming across. We'll get his other arm this time because I'm on the other side. Smashing past that, going north-south. I'm hooking here. I can even grab his lapel, but a lot of times I'm just trying to pull his shoulder up. And as I do that, I'm circling, and this hand's going to come under his neck. And again, right here, so this one's under his neck, and now his elbow is trapped in my armpit. I pull out the far side lapel, and I hand it to the one under the neck. And now if I pull on this, it just really locks his shoulder into place. Now this hand comes in the middle, there's the wrist lock there, and the shoulder lock there.